Thank you for tuning in to Rise Above TV, where we are empowering humanity and supporting unity. You're watching Cracking the Codependency Code with relationship coaches Janie Terrazas and Barry Selby.
So in this talk, we're going to have a conversation about the savior and the victim. You know, the knight in shining armor, and then the damsel in distress, because I played the role of the knight, so I can speak personally for this one.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm sure in a moment, as we start to get into our discussion here about what that actually looks like and how it shows up and what you can do about it, Barry will talk a little bit about what that shows up like for men.
Indeed.
You know? I mean,
Yeah.
there are some similarities in how it shows up for us, but it's just a different energy in general. So maybe you can like touch on that. But what was it again? It was the savior.
The savior and the victim.
The savior and the victim.
So let me say it this way: even though I say the knight in shining armor, because that, and I'll tell you exactly why it's called that for me. There's no sexual. What's the word I'm looking for? There's no gender focus on this, because the truth is there are definitely relationships I was in where I was the victim and my female partner was the savior. So it works both ways.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason why I use the knight in shining armor syndrome, one, because I come from an English background, so in case you haven't taken my accent is not American, but also I was very steeped in the culture of England. Not generationally for many generations. I was actually Eastern European by family lineage, but I loved Robin Hood and the Knights in Shining Armor and Camelot and everything like that. So fast forward to being in the States for a little bit, I was actually in a seminar, a workshop where somebody called me a white knight, and after the seminar was over, we met up outside for a coffee because we were done, and the car I had at the time was a white sports car. This is going back in the middle of the 80s, so a while ago. And so he said, "It's a perfect car for you." Yeah, exactly. I'm a white knight, so I've got a white car, of course, like my stallion, my steed. But the thing was, what I didn't realize the downside of that was, because it felt very noble. Like, oh, I'm going to be a white knight. I'll take that on. I even got the license plate on my car that said white knight. So I was owning it fully. Yeah.
Power word, people.
Enabling codependency. You haven't seen nothing yet.
He really drove it home.
Because the thing was, when looking back now, in different situations I had where I was traveling and doing other things along the way, excuse me, I had a few brief relationships. And looking back now, I see clearly, with extremely clear vision, where each one of those three different relationships, these short, brief relationships, I picked women who needed saving. Now, maybe it's emotional saving. It wasn't physical. It was actually definitely more emotional saving, where I felt them wounded. And one of the things for me is one of my skills is I have a lot of compassion for my clients, who are mostly women, that when I see a woman in distress, the desire for me to save them comes up, which can work to a degree. The challenge for me, and I've now become skilled at this, is where to draw the line at saving versus having empathy. We can have another conversation about empathy and sympathy too. Get to that in a moment. But understanding that saving somebody doesn't mean taking away their ability to save themselves. And that is that fine-tuning, that technique for shifting. Because the temptation when you're someone who's saving somebody else, and I'm well practiced on this, is that I would take away their ability to save themselves, which meant if they got in trouble again, I was required to go back and save them again, and again, and again, no matter what I was doing. The biggest lesson, and it's kind of like the idea of, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, whereas you teach a man a fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Saving somebody so they can learn how to save themselves is the healthier way to help somebody be more empowered. And this is one of the caveats in a way of codependency. Codependency is a requirement for us to always be in a place of giving to somebody else, or taking from somebody else, for our survival, our comfort, our safety. And when I learned the lesson that I no longer need to do that, one, because it was depleting me drastically. Continuing that little story about the car, by the way. After realizing that I was spending my time in the knight in shining armor role too much, I declared to the universe at large that I want to get rid of the license plate. I need to get rid of the license plate because it was too obvious I was telling the universe the wrong message. Being a knight in shining armor was one thing, but to be saving damsels in distress every day was extremely frustrating and draining. And none of the women I was with at that time were choosing to learn from what was happening. They kept being needy of my help, and it wasn't fun on either side, to be honest. So within 2 weeks of me saying I want to get rid of the license plate, my car got stolen with the license plate attached. So be careful what you ask for with the universe.
No kidding.
Yeah, so let me speak to the empathy sympathy thing, because that's one of the biggest pieces of this. Is when you are in a place of being the savior for somebody else's victim, first of all, you're looking through the lens that they can't help themselves. That's a trap, by the way. Because when you're saving somebody else, If they can save themselves, then you won't be in the savior role. So somehow you lose your power of being the man to come, especially if you're a man, to come save the day. He comes to save the day. The truth, and women do this too. And I've been in a place where I gave up my power for that to happen. So I know both sides. But the recognition is that that's a place of coming from a place of sympathy. Because sympathy is seeing the other person as a victim. Empathy is seeing a person who is temporarily unable to take care of themselves. So one of the analogies I use for sympathy versus empathy is empathy is having understanding for somebody else. So if somebody falls down a hole in the ground, if you're in bringing empathy, you roll the rope out to them and you help them climb out. Sympathy is you throw the rope in there and jump in with them, and misery loves company, basically. To be honest, happy hour is really a manufactured sympathy circle.
Oh gosh, that's major. That's gonna be like psh for people.
Everyone getting drunk
Say
together.
That again, say it again. It's
happy hour is basically like a sympathy circle, because people are basically getting drunk together, going, woe is me, and my life is worse than yours. No, my life is worse than yours. And it's like, who can get to the bottom fastest? That's not healthy. So if you're going to go out socially, watch that. That's a dangerous trap.
That's true.
Be understanding that empathy is a way of actually empowering somebody else, because when you're being empathic, you see what they're hurting, and then you help them grow out of it themselves. If you take away their pain so they don't do it themselves, they may not learn the lesson. That's where sympathy becomes detrimental. And as a coach in particular, in the work I've done over the years to help my clients, I love, frankly, it's fulfilling for me to see them stand on their own 2 feet emotionally, where they don't need my help anymore. That to me is gratifying more than anything else. Having them be a client forever, not healthy for them or for me. So that's the lesson I keep learning.
And as a female, it's funny as I'm listening to you, so I took on both sides, but in different ways. Okay, so early on in my career or in my life, I was very much more connected to my masculine energy. I was very driven, and it was about accolades and accomplishments. I was in the corporate world. I went to the top really fast, and I was attracting men who I could support. So, they had their own thing, but I was doing better, and so I was falling into this position where I was financially taking care of most of everything. Okay? And then, so there's that way in which we are trying to help somebody and becoming an enabler and then draining our own selves.
Yeah.
Later in life, I started shifting over into more of my femininity. Not that it wasn't always there, but I did. And then that enabler thing or that savior thing started showing up as the caretaker. So then it was like, I need to heal you. So yeah, I'm not going to take care of you and provide for you, but I'm going to still provide for you, but I'm going to provide a lot of nurturing and a lot of giving. And I was doing that to someone who could not reciprocate it to the same degree.
When you become awake, you make a different choice. And here's the thing. One of the things we don't realize for many of us is that codependency is an inside game. When you learn to love yourself and approve of yourself, that codependency just starts to dissipate, because you don't need anybody else to feel okay. So it does require self-love, self-care, self-approval, self-support, and learning how to really take care of this person here, not that person over there.
We fall into that savior role if when you were little you needed to be saved. And now you're really, really taking on that person that you needed someone to be for you, but you're overcompensating. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And or you needed, or it's the other way around. So
Right.
I'm getting a little bit like twisted here. So if we flip it the other way around, it would be like...
That you're as a young child were becoming the parent for your parents, for example.
There you go, yes.
I know with some of my clients, one client I remember particularly, where growing up, she was in a place where her mother was basically absentee because her father and her mother had a lot of problems, and one of the specifics.
Right.
But basically she felt she took on the role to be mother to her younger brother, because she felt that her mother wasn't doing the job that was needed. So as a 7 or 8 year old, she was stepping into that role to be a caretaker to her younger brother because she felt she had to.
Yes.
So that savior instinct is available to many of us.
Yes.
And it can show up either one because we've been the victim and been saved,
Or-
or we are the savior to help somebody else who we think is a victim. Again, all belief structure stuff.
Exactly. And when you're a child and you step into that position or you're put in that position, you innately know that if they're happy or if they're doing well, then that benefits you somehow. And so then you really take it on. You know what I mean? Because it's like, well, if I help you and you get better, then I won't keep feeling this other crapola, but then it never really shifts and changes, you know?
That's the trap we fall into, is that we're in a place where we don't want them to be too successful because they don't need us anymore. Then we don't have a job anymore. Our identity's invested with that pattern, again, codependency.
It's just like, there's a show on TV, it's My 600-Pound Life. And that's just one way in which you want to look at the psychology of humans, and how we can fall into sort of this, we're enabling someone and keeping them weak so that they keep needing us because that makes us feel empowered. So it's kind of like some of these family members, the individual can't go get the food, they can't do a lot for themselves, and to feel really needed makes them feel important.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so that's why we have to be really careful about how and where we're attempting to feel powerful and why. And when you start to heal a lot of these things and recognize it and start to get dialed into where your worth and your validation and where your power actually comes from, then you don't necessarily rely on all of these protective mechanisms anymore, because you realize there's nothing to protect you from anymore.
Right.
But that's a process in itself.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably more than we cover in the scope of this video. This is more to give you some keys. So a couple of points to play with. One is and it's going to be the simplest thing through the whole program, is learning to be aware of what's happening. Because again, some of these patterns are so automatic and so ingrained, we're not even aware of them until it's been going for 6 months or 2 years. So being able to catch those behaviors early enough and go, hang on a second, I know this, it's familiar, and it's not working. Then you can make a different choice to do something differently. It may not be perfect the first time, but with practice you become more able to catch in an earlier space what's actually happening. And when you start to learn that, then it shifts everything. So again, in terms of the savior-victim role, when you notice that you're going to savior mode, because the thing is, when you're being a savior, there's certain feelings, you know what it feels like when you're in that place. I know myself. You can say, hang on a second, why am I doing this? What is the benefit I'm getting? And what would happen if I don't do this for that person? And facing those questions will give you answers you may not have known before, because 90% of the time, that victim is only a victim to enable your savior. Again, enabling. And that's one of the things, it's like having two pans that come together perfectly. If you don't do the work to understand your own role, you don't feel the person up either, so there's two of you being trapped.
We'll wait for that to go by. Or maybe it's going the other way, but it's perfect timing, you know? It's like, be careful. There's the warning signal. Warning signals will arise. You start to get better at noticing what the warning signals are. You start to catch certain language that you're using or that the other person's using and things like that. When you are starting to notice it and then make the shift, it can feel uncomfortable to start saying no to people. Or to stop doing those things, and then you're going to start to see who really is in your life, because they're there to really give and take versus just to take.
So that little piece right there is a gem, because what's in there is this wonderful thing called approval. When we're in a place where we think we have to keep doing something for somebody else because we somehow feel that their approval, this is the reverse part of codependency, makes us feel better. That when they approve of us, we're okay. That we validate ourselves based on somebody else's view of us. So if we're the savior, oftentimes we're a slave to the victim, because what's happening is we have to make sure we please them so they then thank us and we feel validated. That circle is a massive trap. And it's a double layer of codependency, basically. So recognizing that when we are looking for approval anywhere outside ourselves, that's a clue that there's a codependent part of ourselves looking for approval. So the first step, again, is becoming aware. That's the biggest work that we do on the planet, to be honest. Yes. But it starts this simply.
It's as simple as that. And I know that people hear empathy, and there's people that are empathic. And so those of us that are empathic and that are deep feelers, that whole thing about the empathy, you're like, hey, when you were talking about sympathy and empathy, funny enough, sometimes even understanding that, I'll still be staying at the hole longer than I probably have to.
Well,
and then it's like I keep encouraging them, and I'm like, and it's like, oh, I have to like step away because the rope is there, I can't get in. And you think that just because you're not getting in with them, that you're not getting in with them, and you are if you're
invested.
Right. Invested. And there's certain friendships and or intimate partnerships, or even sometimes co-working stuff like.
And family dynamics too.
And family dynamics, that make it even more difficult to see it for what it is and then make that shift. So we
Right.
understand, we're right there with you. If you need encouragement or support, we're here for you. You know, if you realize that you're struggling with some of these things very deeply, you can learn a lot just on your own by researching and watching things like this, but we're also here for you if you need someone to assist you one-on-one. Is there anything else that you would like to add about it?
Just let me break down empathy one more time, because
Please.
you said the empath thing. So
Yes, yeah, can
this is
you
an
please?
interesting word. People say, well, I'm empathic. It's like, yes, you can have the sensitivity to pick up what's around you, but even with empathy, there is a codependent piece.
Yeah.
So the understanding is what empathy is the ability to be caring for somebody else for their wholeness, being caring for somebody else for their success, being caring for somebody else for their independence so they can stand on their own 2 feet. Sympathy is feeling their pain and stepping into their pain with them, but not with any direction out of that place. It's just simply saying, okay, if I feel sympathy for you, you won't feel as bad because I'll take on some of the load. That's not true empathy.
Right.
Because you're not helping them change anything.
Right, and you mentioned all that support and everything that you were saying, and seeing them and honoring that about them. What we need to remember is we need to honor that about ourselves too.
Exactly.
And I think that's that little fine line where there's empathy and sympathy. Don't lose yourself in helping them and the ones that are lost. It's okay, you want to help them, but know how
Yeah.
much do they actually want it for themselves. And as you're extending a hand, make sure that you're taking care of yourself mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, because you're really not doing them a service
Right.
if you're very depleted and then still trying to be there for them.
So here's a homework assignment for you if you choose to take it on. Is between this talk and the next one, you get to work on yourself. One of the hardest things that you can do, one of the biggest things you can do, is actually to say no. For some of us, because we were people pleasers when we were growing up.
That's our next video, people pleasing. We'll
Get
get
that
deeper
more
into
detail.
that, because it ties into all of this. They're all sort of interconnected.
Codependency has many spokes, but it's one big conglomerate. So this is one of the pieces. So when you learn to say no, especially when it comes to agreements with other people, you start to free yourself up, and it can be painful, difficult, and sometimes like you can't do that. When somebody says no, watch what happens. Now, with some level of understanding that you can't say no to everything, but you can say no to certain things where people are inviting you to things where you think you should out of duty. That's one of those clues. Whenever that yes you were going to say comes with a sense of a should or a have to, reconsider if that's true or not. Because if it's not really true, which it probably isn't, you can say no and be free.
Yes, I have a good little acronym. Check with TED. TED, do you have the time? Do you have the energy? And really gauge your desire. Because you might sometimes have the desire, so you're not really going to do it out of obligation, but your energy and your time is going to be compromised. So check with those 3 things, and if they're all like go, 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 then that's a definite. Now, sometimes there are certain things that you may want to say, it's okay that I don't have the time, I want to make time. But when all 3s are no's, time, energy, and desire, now that's a codependent action right there.
Absolutely.
You know, you don't want to disappoint them. People pleasers don't want to disappoint them. So we're going to go a little bit more into that and how that shows up in the next video. Thanks again for watching Cracking the Codependency Code. Be sure to tune in for more episodes on how you can crack the code.
Be sure to like and follow Rise Above TV for more mindful content.